Welcome to the Life in the Cave podcast, where we work through the nonsense and the lies, noble and otherwise, that you have been encountering in your life this week. It is Monday, November 16th, 2020, and we are here to talk to you about, well, essentially the election and COVID-19. That's what's in the news these days, and that's what we're going to talk about. And in the early days of the COVID pandemic, there were a lot of people that were just kind of thinking about how we were supposed to deal with it. And I guess people are still thinking about how we're supposed to deal with it, but a lot of people are now kind of set in their ways. And, they kind of know what they're expecting and they know what's going on for as best as anyone can. But during these early days, I thought it was very helpful to compare what's going on now with the past, with things that have happened. It's always a good idea to do that. Looking at the past is significant. And I just looked back and read about some of the plagues and the pandemics that have plagued our world, mostly Europe, but other places too. And it gave a really good perspective of what sorts of things we should be really worried about. I mean, we had an Ebola scare a couple of years ago, and that kind of puts it into perspective, right? You get Ebola everywhere, and that's a pretty bad thing. I think bubonic plague, Black Death. There were some plagues in ancient Rome that were pretty bad. Cyprian plague, you can look that up. And the one thing that I learned as I looked into all these things is the value of community, the value of people coming around and supporting people. In fact, the Cyprian plague is a really good example. Did you know, any listeners, and also Micah, the cities that had churches, Christian churches in them, had a 60% greater chance of surviving the Cyprian plague than those who did not, because people would come around and they'd give water, they'd give food, they'd give shelter, just basic necessities. Like, they didn't know how to actually fix this thing, but they just took care of people instead of throwing them out in the streets. So if there's anything you can learn about plagues in the past, pandemics, it's that things have been worse and likely they will be worse one day. And the best thing we can do is help each other in whatever way we can. So this isolation stuff, it might be good for some things, but we need to be supporting each other as well. And that's my opening monologue if you needed one.
I think we do always need an opening rant of some kind to really set the tone for what the rest of the ep is going to be about. So yeah. Good job.
Oh, well, thanks.
Good job taking it this time.
Yeah, I think that that's the scary thing, is that not the plague. I almost called it a plague. This pandemic, COVID-19,
it's not a plague.
Yeah, it's something that's bad, no doubt. But most of the bad stuff is just compounded by the fact that people are isolated, by the fact that people are afraid of each other, and like that's what happened in Rome. And like people were throwing their family members out into the street when they had symptoms. They were just saying, see you later, like, you're gonna die now. And that's why so many people died, because they weren't getting the help that they needed. And of course we rely on the government for that, but that could be a problem as well, I imagine.
Yeah, I think one of the more interesting aspects of this is it doesn't seem to occur to most of the people, at least the ones I've interacted with, how this thing can actually be acquired and passed around in your own home. I thought initially, when all these countries in Europe were undergoing stay-at-home orders, that this was kind of seen as the only logical thing to do until they could figure out how it spread, how virulent it was, how deadly it was when you got it. What were the chances of you acquiring it from someone and then either dying from it yourself or passing it on to someone else? And eventually they figured out, especially as more testing has shown, a lot of people are symptom-free and doesn't appear to be quite as deadly or as virulent as they originally predicted. But one of the more interesting things was in the late spring, early summer, the New York governor, I live in New York State, governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, said that they were shocked, they were surprised that people were getting it somehow. They didn't know how, but they were staying at home because they're under a stay-at-home order, and they were spreading it to people in their own home. Like he just couldn't believe that like this is what like could happen. And now, as cases have begun to rise again, you're seeing a lot of people saying, like, I don't know how this thing is going around because I don't go anywhere. I don't have any new people outside from outside coming to my home. I wear PPE everywhere I go, and they can't seem to figure out like how they're even getting this thing. And what I kind of would like to know is like if no one really knows very much about this, and people who follow all of the protocols that have been laid out to a T, and they still get it, what has all of the lockdown stuff and all of the protective measures actually been for if it looks like most viruses, like 95% of viruses in the past, that essentially, for lack of a better term, virus is going to virus. Like that's really what's ultimately true, I think, about this whole thing. Like it's going to happen. Like, and people need to kind of wrap their minds around the fact that they're probably going to get it, or they're going to have some sort of immunity to it, or they're going to get it and have no symptoms, and therefore they're going to develop immunity and be part of beating it off, for the long term. And I guess I wish more people would say by what measure is this no longer worth us going through this
Oh
process
yeah, well,
for?
I don't think you'll ever get that. I don't because that's not what it's about. I don't think. But along the lines of what you were saying, I think you have some options, right? Like you could be like, is it Australia or New Zealand? That's literally putting people in like concentration camps. I think it's New Zealand. It's these.
Both are doing really horrible things right now. I mean, Australians are getting arrested for sharing things on social media and protesting, holding up signs.
Yeah,
They're
I've
getting
seen that
arrested.
people getting through. Yeah, people breaking into your house to because you suggested to protest or rally. Yeah. So yeah, well, actually, well, let
But
me go ahead.
I mean, that's the thing that I took this mostly because the governor of Nevada. I don't know if you've been following this story, but just like on like I don't know, Thursday or Wednesday or Thursday of last week, there was a spike in Nevada, and he really just like scolded all of his citizens for being just irresponsible, going out to casinos and going to parties at their friends' houses and all this. So just being he called them irresponsible,
Hmm.
and that they had 2 weeks to get everything under control. And he actually told them he was basically like a a dad of a teenager, and he goes, "I'm not going to come back in 2 weeks, and I'm going to give you another chance. Like fix it right now. All right." That's what they said. Then like on Friday or Saturday, he himself tested positive for
uh,
COVID-19,
yeah.
and like no one, like I feel like he should be scolded. Like he's 7, like he treated everyone else. But he basically said you can take all the precautions that are possible, and you can still get the virus. And he was like, I don't know how I got it because I was following every precaution. And like that just to me it just really feels like if this is the case, like we really need to pursue some sort of more common sense strategy. Like we need to accept that this is probably the way that it is, take more extreme steps to protect the vulnerable because the steps we've taken aren't protecting the vulnerable. They're not protecting regular people, but we're going to be fine. Like healthy people, it's not protecting them, but they're going to be fine. But the vulnerable aren't, and the plans to protect the vulnerable have not worked at all so far. So they something else has to be rethought about how to fix that problem, and everyone else needs to basically be able to go on and live their life with the idea that probably there's a good chance you're gonna get it, but you know what, you're gonna probably be okay too.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of people that are kind of doing silly stuff now, because it's the case demic. There's a lot of
Yeah,
cases,
pandemic.
and the cases are scaring everybody. Which like frankly, if the cases were such back in June or whatever, and when we didn't really have the therapeutics, and the virus seemed to be a little worse for whatever reason, Maybe that would have been a concern. I'll just run into some clips. Here's some clips about why we should all be terrified. I've got two, so I'll just play the first one.
More states reaching breaking points as a coronavirus pandemic hits new highs. The U.S. reported more than 100,000 daily cases for the last 10 days. Oregon and New Mexico announcing a partial lockdown, urging residents to stay home for 2 weeks.
If we don't act right now, we cannot preserve the lives, can't keep saving lives.
In North Dakota, after months of resistance, the governor now mandating masks, following another day of record infections and hospitalizations.
Our situation has changed, and we must change with it.
In Nevada, where daily cases also surged to record levels, the governor announced he's tested positive for the virus. Idaho is
there you go.
rolling back its reopening, limiting indoor and outdoor gatherings, and mobilizing the National Guard to help overwhelmed hospitals. In Chicago, residents are being told to leave their homes for essential needs only starting Monday, the advisory lasting at least 30 days. And in New York, Governor Cuomo is clamping down now, even with one of the lowest rates of virus spread in the country.
We believe we're going to have to be taking additional steps.
This weekend, he's joining Northeast governors for an emergency summit after ordering bars, restaurants, and gyms to shut down for a 10 p.m. curfew. The new rules prompting fear.
Do you understand that? I don't get why there's what does the curfew have to do with anything? Does the virus spread more at night?
Yeah, it's scared of the dark, and it's really scared of the people who come out at night.
Oh, okay. So it does spread better at night.
Yeah.
It's nocturnal. Got it. Okay.
The future, it's very disconcerting, to be honest.
And frustration.
Small businesses, they've already been affected. It's pretty ridiculous, honestly.
The U.S. has averaged 1,000 deaths every day this month. The city of El Paso now using mobile morgues to hold the dead.
So it's not going to get better. It's going to get worse. And then I don't know how far along until we do something drastically.
But coronavirus survivors offer light during these dark days.
Mobile morgues. That's where we're at. Speaking of plagues and historical pandemics, that was a thing. There were that was a story in Britain. I guess it was like the late 1800s. I think it was. Oh, what was it? I'm not sure. It was a respiratory disease. Dang, I don't remember. But anyway, there was something that was hitting London pretty hard in the late 1800s. I could probably look it up. And the people, I couldn't get people to carry the dead people away because they were afraid they were going to get it. Let's see. So yeah, mobile morgues.
Mobile morgues. I understand that obviously there's people who have lost loved ones and family members and so on with it. So I get that there's different perspectives on this, and I've heard a lot of people say oh, well, maybe if you knew someone who died, maybe you would take it seriously too. But I think it's really important and we've said this a couple times over the last several weeks that we've been doing this, is just to take the numbers in perspective and not allow yourself to get totally hung up on this case situation. If you look at case fatality rate, that is a much better standard of how to think about what's going on, which is that essentially that even if you acquire it in the US, it's less than 2% right now who actually are in fatal danger of dying from it. So even if you get it, there's a 2% chance, and you've seen the numbers with the age brackets and stuff. It's in the 30s, but over 30% for people over 75 years old. But everyone under that really just precipitously drops off to the point where it really does seem, I'm not saying it is a flu, but it does seem to follow kind of the flu. The only difference is, little kids can die of the flu. It doesn't really seem like kids are dying from this. You got 28 kids in the entire country who've died from this thing, whereas the flu is definitely more deadly for the youngest of the young. So it seems to be following that trend, but you don't hear it talked about in that way on any of the channels.
Yeah, well, I will say that Sorry, I just got distracted. I was trying to do something with the stream and it didn't work. First of all, I looked it up. Cholera, late 1800s. It was cholera that was killing everyone in Britain. But the other thing that I was thinking of when you were talking is just the fact, like you were saying, there's so many people that are just gonna be okay when this is all said and done. That, like, I think, what was it, a couple of weeks ago we were talking about the Barrington Declaration.
Yeah.
That, like, in some sense, like, it's best to let people get it.
Yeah, those three experts seem to indicate that like we kind of just mentioned as a, what probably would work best is to take it easy on a lot of the the lockdowns, because those don't prove to be effective at all. Initially, the lockdown was about flattening the curve, as we talked about many times. People understood that all of a sudden wasn't really the thing. But those three experts said herd immunity is essentially the only thing that has worked for various other types of problems. So for young, healthy people, it's not good that we lock them down, because there's no timeline when we can think that actually will be safe to know that it'll come out. Lock things down for 2 weeks, a month, and then everyone comes back out again and it just picks up again. That it's not a solution to anything. And in fact, it might be harming the ability to get rid of it faster, which is something that can happen when more people get it quicker and defeat it, recover from it, or don't get virulent strains. So I just think it's really, I think it's really sad that, in economics, there's always the seen and the unseen. So there's the seen aspects of consequences from an action, but there are unseen consequences that aren't always noticed. And I think that's what we're going to find from this, is we don't really know the consequences of locking people in their homes for 30 days at a time, or in some places.
We're certainly starting to learn. That's for sure.
Yeah, right. So we have a mental health crisis, possibly right around the corner here. We're talking about possibly seeing. This is from the WHO predicts that in the close to 100 million people are at risk of starvation due to various lockdowns and food production shutdowns, mostly in the third world. And you really can't talk about any of that stuff, because if you do, you're always painted as wanting to kill someone's grandma. And again, I know some grandmas have died from this, but it's like that's the only thing that can be considered here. No one's talking about any of the unseen stuff.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna play another one of how everyone's gonna die, and it's all over. We're all dead. But I also just want to say that if you are in the room right now, if you're watching, we'd love to hear from you. Comment down below or on the side or wherever the widget is, and hit that like button. That's helpful to us. But I want to play another clip that I found here. I think it's this one.
Tonight, hospitalizations across the country are facing a crisis like they've never seen before.
It's a feeling of dread. Because we know what is coming.
The country's setting a record for hospitalizations on Friday, the fourth day in a row, over 60,000. In just the last month, COVID hospitalizations in Illinois have nearly tripled. ICUs are quickly approaching capacity. Medical workers scrambling to keep up with the surge. And doctors like Michelle Prickett say healthcare workers are at a breaking point.
Everyone feels like they ran a marathon and now we're being asked to do an Ironman, and we're just tired.
Hospitals across the Midwest are being crippled by COVID. In Wisconsin, doctors and nurses are now forced to prioritize care, and they're running out of beds.
I never thought as a healthcare provider that I would be in the position of trying to decide who gets life-saving medical care and who doesn't. That kind of stuff isn't supposed to happen in the United States.
All right, let's talk about that. Do you believe that people are making you live, you die sort of decisions, a sort of medical, what do they call those? Medical jury, or what? I forgot the term, but they were talking about that particularly when they were talking about like universal healthcare in Britain, how like certain illnesses you just like kind of you say, well, it's, you're kind of beyond repair, or we're not gonna. They're like what are they called, death panels or whatever.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, but are we supposed to believe that that's happening? Like, really? Especially with like life flighting. If there was really no room and someone was dying.
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
take them somewhere else.
Yeah, and that's what I think it's so funny. Even the hospitalizations, stat gets really. I mean, I think we talked about this before too. So if we're repeating ourselves, shame on us. I don't really remember what we talk about from week to week, but I think hospitalizations, like, really, like, that number can fluctuate pretty strongly even in one hospital system. So when you don't need beds go away. And when you do need beds, more can be brought in and utilized in various places. And like, if you go, there's been a lot of websites that have been popping up with a lot of data on these things. And you can go and look and see what the number of cases are in every state and the number of hospital beds. So a lot of states you'll see, big drastic differences. Like, Alaska's got like very few cases in the, like 150 cases, and they have 1,500 beds. But you'll also see states that have 50,000 cases and 40,000 beds, and that's very scary, obviously, and it's used as a statistic in the news. Well, that we're running out of beds because look at all the hospitalizations. But the numbers that they're coming up to, for instance, these are not like all people who need to stay in a hospital bed on a ventilator or some type of special intervention, like a hospitalization, and how it's even categorized isn't the same state to state, hospital to hospital. Right. And inpatient even in places where there are like 50,000 or whatever, like sometimes a hospitalization is like coming in and getting examined by a medical physician and then being sent home.
Right.
But like this number, like because again, initially we were counting deaths and we were watching that. And I understand, again, people have died, but then the cases had to be a thing. But then everyone was starting to see how those two charts were diverging. Cases continued to rise, but deaths continued to fall because the IFR rate was really not following each other. So now they needed this other statistic to talk about, which is hospitalizations. But even that is kind of a faulty statistic because that number can fluctuate. We can increase the number of beds in hospitals. We can bring in what was that boat that the Army sent in to the harbor in New York that they like had like 6 people go on, because there were supposed to be all these people in New York City without hospital beds, and then it turned out they didn't even need it at all. Like, there's so much that can happen. And yeah, I don't imagine that in places people are just choosing who lives and who dies based on COVID. It just doesn't follow. I mean, unless we have some doctors or nurses in the chat, maybe they can correct us and tell us that that's not true. It just doesn't follow.
Right. Yeah, I'm skeptical, but whatever. Do you have any more COVID? Because I've got a good segue from COVID to election. If you were.
I just have a question, just a rhetorical question for everyone to consider, and all then right. We don't have to even get an answer. We can just let people think about it, which is, I guess, do you have in your own mind a number that you would be happy reaching in order to feel like you could go out and live your life again? Because I hear a lot of talk about, this is the new normal and how this is going to affect, our lives for the foreseeable future and all that stuff. And one life or one death is too many. We really need to get to 0 deaths and 0 cases. But I really wonder, like, what regular people are thinking about right now. At what point is mere biological life good enough for you? That as long as you're alive but locked in your home and can't go anywhere and can't really do anything, and every time you go out you have to be afraid of the people, when you're walking down the sidewalk you have to jump off to the side so they don't spill a droplet into your mouth, and everywhere you go you have to be masked up. Like, at what point is that, like, you're cool with that being your life? And I've asked that question to myself, but I wonder what other people think about that, and where the standard of what is life worth living to everyone.
Yeah, well, that's actually a big question in bioethics and philosophy of medicine. I think you've read, or at least you read part of the what's it called? It's that the Leon Cass book.
Which one?
It's his bioethics one.
Oh yeah.
Toward more natural science.
Yeah.
And that's his argument. He's like, is medicine, does it exist to prevent death or to enhance life, more or less? And basically, he's kind of skeptical of this medicine, which is just trying to prevent death at the expense of, a terrible life. For instance, like end of life cancer treatment, for instance, like, you could stay alive for a couple more months if they inject you with all these chemicals, but is it worth it? And I mean, that's an extreme, right? I mean, if you stay in your house, it's not the same as having terminal cancer. But I think it's a good question to ask, particularly when it comes to medicine. Like, what is the threshold for your acceptance of a certain regimen or a certain course of treatment, we might say? Like lockdowns and masks are essentially a medical recommendation, right? Medical treatment. So, yeah, it's a good question.
And I think if there's something else we can do, we can show the difference between states who follow different practices. Like there's a really great chart of two states kind of compared to each other, and they both took totally different approaches in how they chose to lock down, enforce universal masking, and when they implemented universal masking, and so on and so forth. And that chart is really helpful to look at because basically you have two state lines that pretty closely follow each other, took completely different approaches to this thing, and yet they look like they pretty much end up in the exact same place. So what are these, all these things that we're trying to do to beat this virus when essentially, the virus is going to virus? What are all the things that that we're doing? What are they actually helping us in the end with?
Yeah. So
that's it.
So two things. I'll go through them real quick. That one's COVID, and then one just kind of transitioned over to election. The first one is this whole Ticketmaster thing. I don't know if you heard about the Ticketmaster, how they want to require you to be vaccinated before you go to a concert.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as of today, they said they were sorry about that. So they backed out, probably because they wanted to make money. And so that's good news, I think, that you're not going to be required to have a vaccine or some kind of digital passport to get into your concerts. I don't really go to that many concerts anyway. And when I do, they're small. They're not run through Ticketmaster. So that's good news. But then just a quick clip relating to the national mask mandate. This is Andrew Cuomo. That's the governor, right? Not the newscaster.
Right. That's
Chris Cuomo. Yeah. Okay. So this is him, but it relates to I'll just play it.
You need a national mask mandate. And when you see the virus starting to flare up, we call them microclusters. We do so much testing that we can see it in a neighborhood. Then you bring in restrictions to close down activity in that neighborhood.
So yeah, he's calling for a national mask mandate. I know people are sort of afraid that Biden's going to do a national mask mandate. And I think it's I don't think it's a good idea. But I do think that is part of the discussion, and I think that the national mask mandate is a good segue into the Biden-Harris administration, President-elect Biden-Harris, all the craziness that's going on with the election, and what we can expect going forward. So I want to ask you a question. I want to do some of these more often, because I think that it's worth documenting some of these opinions. What % chance does Trump somehow win the election?
Yeah, I've not been much of a gambler, so I don't even understand entirely how odds work. But like laying odds for various things, but
sure.
So it's really hard to pick a number, but the % chance, I guess, would be I don't know, 1 in 5. Was that 20%? 20% chance. That's what I'd say. That's what I'm feeling right now.
That's a fair assessment. Yeah, when I'm thinking odds, I'm just thinking of like what I look at when I check the weather in the morning. 50% chance it's gonna rain. All right. So yeah, I think that's good. I think there's a big enough chance that it's worth talking about. But I also think that it's quite scary because whatever you want to happen, it would be devastating for civil everything. There would be some serious unrest in the event that he gets in.
Definitely.
And that's, of course, the media's fault. And if there's one thing that we're trying to establish in this podcast, it's the fact that the media is almost always bad at this point. They're almost always going to do the wrong thing. And are you familiar with J.P. Sears?
I am.
He's an ultra spiritual life guy, or a redheaded guy. Yeah, he's been going in on all this stuff. Like, he's had a really good commentary for all of it, and he just recently put out a video, a pretty long video, about how basically, like, the Associated Press doesn't even call elections. Like, that's not like they have no authority to do that. So when they announce an election before it's certified and stuff like that, they're only really setting everything up to be really tumultuous. Like, there's going to be problems when everyone expects one thing and then gets another thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm concerned. Whichever way it goes, I think it's going to be a dark winter.
Yeah, that's like the buzzword right now. Like, I personally, someone who lives in the northeastern part of the country, I feel like every winter
it's always
is
a dark winter.
But now everyone's talking about it. So it's like either they've all caught up to the feelings I have, or else someone has been told what to say, as is usual with these news organizations, and they pass it around, and they're all using the same language.
Oh yeah, they've got all that. So okay.
It's all scripted.
So let's talk about the election. Let's talk about what it's really hard to find. That's one thing that I noticed. If you want to find like what these people are saying, for instance, like Trump's stance on the election or his people's stance, whether it be Giuliani or Sidney Powell or whoever it is that's talking about this, it's not easy. Like this, like if you search this on Google, you're not gonna get any meat and potatoes in the first couple search results. You're gonna have to really find, which is obvious. Like, we're expecting there to be some sort of censorship. I mean, even this podcast right now probably has something below it that says, the Associated Press has called the election for Joe Biden. So don't listen to anyone else. But essentially, I think if the Trump stance boils down to maybe two or three tenets, right? The first is the mail-in ballots. That there's some fraud with the ballots coming into the building. So that is to say, people who weren't supposed to vote voted. There were votes that were copied or whatever. Anyway, there were ballots that were not cast by individuals, mailed in and counted. The second tenet is these voting machines, and so the claim is that the voting machines, the Dominion voting machines, were hacked or caused some kind of situation where the votes were not counted properly. Votes were taken away from Trump, votes were added to Biden. And the third has to do with the accountability within these voting places, whether it be people not allowed to watch the counting, these independent surveyors or whatever they're called, and that sort of situation, allowing for certain levels of fraud. So those are the three things, and I guess
I have a question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't want to get you off track, but which of those three do you think is the most likely to be true on the Trump case, and which of the three is the most likely to be debunked?
I think that the mail-in ballots is probably the most likely to be true. However, I also think that it's quite possible that the mail-in ballots alone, if they could even distinguish which ones were which would be very difficult, I think, because ballots don't have people's names on them. I don't know how to connect them to a voter. I think that's likely to be true, Whether or not it's likely to have enough import on the actual election is another question. As far as this whole Dominion voting machine, that could change the election, but I don't know if it's true.
Yeah, I think it's going to be the hardest case to make, and I know Sidney Powell is working on this case on the president's behalf, but I feel like that's going to be I think that's the hardest one to argue. I think allowing observers for each campaign to get close and see the election. I know in Pennsylvania that was happening a little bit in Philadelphia, but the Pennsylvania Attorney General specified that, they were kept, 10 feet away because, they didn't want them getting too close because that might interfere with the counting. And so they made a big stink, and then suddenly they allowed them to come up to be 6 feet away so they could see it, so they could make sure nothing. But even, from 6 feet, I guess, so I don't know, you can't see like fake votes being slid. I don't know what I guess the Trump side wanted to see out of that, other than the fact that, okay, so if you are being hindered from viewing up close, that gives you reason to believe that possibly someone is doing something shady, but there's no proof that anything is being done that's inappropriate. It's just that the perception of something bad happening is more easy to believe if you don't have people standing there verifying that everything is done correctly. But also there's no proof per se that anything happens. I think that particular case is going to be fairly hard to make a real sticking case for. But yeah, I think that depending on what happens with these machines and what can be found, obviously we know from the last election there were some kids who were able to go in and hack some of these machines and get them to report like completely opposite votes.
Yeah, I've got a clip for that.
Oh, you have this? Okay, good.
I don't know if it was from last election or not, but here's the clip.
I think it was from 2018.
Also taking a deep dive, election security white hat hacker Hari Hursty.
They have set up a complicated system which is centralized and doesn't seem to have any safeguards.
Georgia's vote tallying system is a complex assortment of laptops, iPads, magnetic cards, touchscreens, printers, and scanners. Lots of moving parts. In 2019, Georgia bought the devices from a Canadian company called Dominion Voting Systems. They replaced paperless machines like these, made by a now defunct company called Diebold Election Systems. A federal judge forced the state to scrap the discredited devices. Election security experts working for the plaintiffs in the lawsuit against the state have uncovered several troubling issues. Alex Halderman looked closely at the QR codes, where the votes are encoded for the scanner.
By analyzing the structure of the QR codes, I've been able to learn that there's nothing that stops an attacker from just duplicating one, and the duplicate would count the same as the original barcode.
And in late September, another concern came to light. During testing, election workers found half the names of the 21 candidates for Senate intermittently disappeared from screens during the review phase.
You never want to rush something which is mission critical, and this is mission critical, into production without proper time of testing. That's really one of the ways bad actors are finding the vulnerabilities to exploit, is looking for honest vulnerabilities and finding out if they can be weaponized.
Yeah, well, that's not the exact clip, but that's the same idea as these voting systems. You can do some shenanigans with them.
Yeah, what do you say? You could hack in and duplicate votes, so you could make more votes appear than what it seems like there are. And I think maybe one of the cases that you could make, and I know that there's no probably legal precedent for this, but it's just the sheer number of votes this election. Like the turnout was just insane, and it's really hard to think how in all these kind of key critical states, and just those where the turnout jumped so highly, like in Wisconsin and Michigan and in Pennsylvania and in Georgia, I think are the big four that, these states that are all like the perfect swing states, that the numbers jumped up, but most of the other states, they didn't come up very much at all. Like what happened?
Well,
Was it
I
just
mean,
really good ground campaigns?
yeah, it was Lady
by
Gaga.
both groups. Lady Gaga. What is that?
She did
It was
it.
very convincing.
It was all
She had me.
all the celebrities, Sarah Silverman, Mark Ruffalo, they told him to go vote and they did it. That's what it was. Okay,
Yeah, the
so
hawk tells you to vote. You gotta.
so yeah, really. I've got some clips on more Sidney Powell clips, but basically what they're saying, like what they're claiming happened. I've got 2 clips, so we can go through those.
Okay.
Well, there are suits filed in Michigan and Pennsylvania. They evidence significant irregularities in the voting process, fake ballots being brought in on pallets after voting closed, people testifying to having seen any sort of things from people writing Biden-Harris things on the side of a bus to ballots being laying on the sidewalk, to ballots being put in a trash can. Always Trump ballots went in the trash can. It's just stunning, Maria. And then we have statistical evidence that we haven't even brought out yet. That's my next venture, is to explain the statistical anomalies that show it was physically impossible for the election to have come out the way it did. It's just...
Yeah, so I wonder, like I'm really thinking about, they've got fake ballots coming in pallets or whatever, boxes through the back door. Like, are they just, there are 2 options, right? Either that's not true or they don't have evidence of that. Because if they did, you'd think that they'd bring it forth. Like, that would be something that would on day 1 be established. Or they're just stacking up evidence and they just want to drop everything at once for like this grand reveal. Like, I don't know, is she just lying about it, or do they have it?
Yeah, and that's the question I think we do have to ask, because would a lawyer come in and just outright lie? It's kind of hard to think that they would, but also I know from the other side of things, a lot of people have pointed out something that I think has some legs to it, which is Trump's whole candidacy has been something of a sort of distraction kind of campaign, which is it's chaos. Like, there's so much chaos going on that it's really hard to know what's right, what is actually like the main point. Because like sometimes like it's so chaotic that your eyes are over here looking at this and the real thing is totally on the other side and you couldn't catch it because there's just so much going on. And he's personally, I think he's talked about doing this, like he would be able to get things done as a president, get things passed, because he would say something really, really explosive on Twitter and everyone is just reacting to that. And then on the side, he's over here getting stuff done and passing various bills and doing things. Like, he likes to work that way. He likes to be bombastic, draw all the attention to that, and then secretly on the side, he's really getting his work done. Is that accurate in how you've understood how he campaigned in 2015 and 2016, how he won the nomination for the Republican ticket? He became the president against all odds, and then kind of had obviously he was in trouble the entire time he was president. He was gone after for being a Russian hacked election. Right. He was impeached, all that other stuff. But do you concur that that's kind of how he runs his campaign, so that there's a possibility, at least it's kind of like, let's just make as many claims as possible, see what people go after, and let's see which one sticks, which of these things can actually convince people?
Yeah, it's possible, but that's sort of the other thing that's really, I don't want to say concerning, but it definitely like raises attention. Is like, he's not going out there and he's not making a mess. Like, he's got some tweets, but based on what you'd expect, like you'd expect Kaylee out there, you'd expect him to be making these statements publicly, like the pressers. And you're not seeing a lot of it. In fact, the first couple of days after the election, people thought that he was just kind of sulking. Um, I don't know. I don't know what to make of it, but he's got to make a move. I don't know what the move is going to be, but this lady seems pretty certain that they've got a case.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see if they actually do press it forward. I mean, I know each state has their own path of this point forward, and how I understand it is they'll make certain requests and demands of attorneys general and state legislatures to make rulings in one direction or another. At some point, various judges can be brought in, and then at the last resort, I think it could go to the Supreme Court. I know that the president has said before that that's what he would do if needed, but there's a bunch of other steps that have to fall into place before that. So I'd just be interested to see some central kind of claims with some evidence, because like you said, like, is someone just making up that story that ballots were brought in on pallets? Like,
right.
Yeah, you're right. Either it's true or it's not true. If it's true, like, they probably should do some fact checking somewhere along the way before they would just say, oh yeah, ballots came in on pallets. Like, you feel like you'd have to have at least testimony, someone who's willing to swear under oath that happened.
Yeah.
So I just like to see that person and talk to them.
Well, speaking of testimony, I wanted to talk real quick about the what's the guy's name?
The postal worker?
Yeah, Richard Hopkins.
Yeah.
That's an interesting. Now, I will say, the sort of fraud that he's alleging is not, unless it's like universal top-down USPS policy, it's not going to change the election. Like, what he was basically saying is some people were talking about post-dating some ballots. So if stuff came in after the time was postmarked after the 3rd, then they were just going to kind of like include them. Those are the mail-in ballots.
Yeah.
And the real interesting part is not necessarily his claim. Again, I think his claim is only really significant if it were somehow like a universal policy, because a couple of postmarked ballots in Erie, Pennsylvania probably isn't going to do anything. But it's the way it was treated afterwards. Did you hear about like the guy that went and tried to, like, the tough guy that came and tried to talk to him?
Yeah, it's kind of getting a little threatened.
Yeah, it was kind of weird. And then later on, there was a tweet from the House Oversight Committee, which claimed that he recanted.
That's right, which is not true.
Not true. Yeah, I think I have the clip of him not recanting. Here we go.
My name is Richard Hopkins. I am the postal employee who came out and whistle blew on the Erie, PA Postal Service, postal office. I am right at this very moment looking at an article written by Washington Post. It says that I fabricated the allegations of ballot tampering. I'm here to say that I did not recant my statements. That did not happen. That is not what happened. And you will find out tomorrow. And I would like that the Washington Post recant their wonderful little article that they decided to throw out there.
Yeah, so that's reality. He didn't. Which, all in all, I'd be fine if the Washington Post put an article out, because I expect that sort of thing. But for a tweet from the House Oversight Committee, that's a problem. You can't, government agency. I think there was some, like, he said something, but it wasn't a recantation. I don't know, maybe it was construed as a recantation. But obviously he believes the stuff that he says.
Yeah, I mean, so do you know anyone who's on the House Oversight Committee, like, who might have been responsible for whatever tweeting out that statement?
Well,
like, I happen to
let's
know.
Look it up.
I know Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Do you remember her?
Oh yeah.
She is on the House Oversight Committee. You know who else is on the House Oversight Committee?
Nancy Pelosi.
No. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Oh, sweet.
Do you know who else is on the House Oversight Committee?
I'm looking.
Rashida Tlaib. So there's a lot of people who are essentially maybe sworn enemies of the president, who he calls out on the reg, that happen to be on that committee. So I could see, possibly someone, tweeting something out there or making a statement from that Twitter account or from that office, which is probably not verified by all members of the committee. But I just think it's interesting. You're right. I mean, the votes aren't going to make the biggest difference. And I know that's what some of my friends who are on the left have been saying. Like, even if there's a recount, there's a good chance that you're going to find several thousand more votes for Trump that were miscounted or mistakes. Like, you'll see more errors that harmed Trump than helped him. They have all admitted that. But what they're saying is there's no way he's going to find 500,000 votes across 6 states that he really needed. Yeah. Like, yeah, sure, Pennsylvania might be off by 1,000 or 2, and the same in North Carolina and Georgia and so on and so forth. But I guess he'd want North Carolina, but in Georgia, in Wisconsin. But like, he's not going to make up the 100,000+ votes that are in Michigan. Like, a recount's not going to turn that over. So even if these things did happen, and they shouldn't happen, they will say this too, but what's the big deal? It's not going to change the outcome of the election, and it just makes him look bad to fight it. And that's what they're saying. And in some sense, I get that. I do get that a little bit. Like, fighting for this like principled thing that really isn't going to change. And especially, he doesn't seem to be saying, well, let's just kind of revote. Let's make sure the vote count is good. He's claiming, no, I won, and it was stolen from me. And it does feel like that's a harder claim to make and back up unless you have really Loctite.
Yeah,
case.
I mean, it's got to come out soon. If it's not going to come out soon, then we know it doesn't exist. So we'll keep our eyes peeled. However, I do wonder how many these news outlets are going to cover that sort of thing. You've seen all the people that like cut away from interviewees and stuff like in the news. That's really common. Oh, we can't allow that to be said. It's dishonest. So we'll see. I'm waiting for it. I think we're gonna see something, whether it works or not. We're gonna see something coming out from that side. They're gonna drop something. They've got it, or else they're done for.
Yeah.
I want. Did you see this? What's her face? Christina Amanpour, Crystal Knock reference?
No.
I don't know who she is. I think she's affiliated with CNN, but it might be like British CNN or something. Christina.
Oh, Christina Amanpour. Oh, she's a famous world-renowned journalist of the highest order. She has a really unique voice, and she's got some classic clips of her saying some pretty crazy things in the middle of the last election campaign and during the Russiagate stuff.
Yeah,
she's one of my favorites. She's one of my favorites because she comes across as being a very serious journalist, as you know, but she has some weak spots.
Yeah, well, she said some crazy stuff just recently, and I'll play it for you.
Welcome to the program, everyone. I'm Christiane Amanpour in London. This week, 82 years ago, Kristallnacht happened. It was the Nazis' warning shot across the bow of our human civilization that led to genocide against a whole identity. And in that tower of burning books, it led to an attack on fact, knowledge, history, and truth. After 4 years of a modern-day assault on those same values by Donald Trump, the Biden-Harris team pledges a return to norms, including the truth. And every day, Joe Biden makes presidential announcements about good governance and the health and security of the American people, while the great brooding figure of his defeated opponent rages, conducting purges of perceived enemies and preventing a transition.
That was a good one, right?
So Trump is like the crystal knot.
Yeah, exactly. He's Hitler. But they've said that in so many ways. It's like,
Oh, that is definitely a new rephrasing. She didn't come out and say he's Hitler, but making these cheap comparisons is terrible. I mean, first of all, that's the thing. That's the thing that makes her so bad, is because she's so high and mighty about journalistic integrity, and you can't make. I mean, she's breaking Godwin's law essentially in like the worst possible way, and so smug these people are who make these claims. There's
just no question that President Trump.
That's what makes it the worst.
Yeah, I just sorry, I just clicked on an article and it started playing a video. Apparently, Israel demands her apologize over the Kristallnacht comparison. Just Israel.
They should.
Yeah, so they're holding their feet to the fire. So maybe she'll apologize to Israel, or maybe she won't. I don't know. So those are the big things that I've got.
Yeah.
I wanted to also say quickly, I think we covered it just a little bit earlier, but I wanted to also just say that the media is also covering Trump and his resistance to this election in a really weird way. There's a lot of antipathy towards him for not conceding.
Yeah.
But it's not an entirely uncommon thing. Like if you don't concede the election, I mean if he's gonna have to concede at some point if he's
right.
If his attempts are not successful.
Right.
So I don't know why people are making such a big deal of him just letting this process play through. It's very possible that these courts are going to say, you know what, you don't have a case, and then he's out. But they're making it sound like he's Hitler, right? he's not going to leave.
Most of these media outlets, Fox News somewhat excluded from this, but the vast majority of them have gone out of their way over the last 4+ years to berate and demonize anything and everything that he has done, which has made people who probably wouldn't even call themselves fans, or people who definitely didn't vote and wouldn't vote for him, they've kind of brought a lot of those people to his side just because they see that the way that they're handling him is I don't know. I don't want to use that banned word that you put in the other podcast or one of your more recent videos on the channel, which is unprecedented.
Yeah.
I don't want to use that banned word, but a lot of people who have covered this, just people from the outside, we're talking, kind of independent people, probably people who would consider themselves to be on the left and part of the legacy media, but have somehow left because they're unhappy with how the legacy media have handled this thing. So think Matt Taibbi, think Glenn Greenwald, and other people who would, otherwise be on the left or independent. They're saying, Andrew Sullivan, I know he just mentioned this recently. What makes this so bad is because at no other point in history has the media acted in such a clearly biased way against the president, even if he does handle things in the wrong way, even if he's not presidential, even if he's mean or rude or any of the other things. Like, this is not how you're supposed to report. If you call yourself a journalist, you shouldn't be making the kind of statements that you are. Anderson Cooper mentioned just last week after the results that he looks like a turtle. What do you call him? An overweight turtle, an obese turtle on his back. These are just not things that you would ever say about a president ever.
Well, about another person. about another human being.
About another human, let alone the president of this country. And so because of that, it just makes people kind of want to cheer for him because they're kind of sick of seeing someone get treated in that way. And so again, even for myself, I wouldn't consider myself a Trump fan at all, but I'm just kind of like, well, obviously these people need to go down, whether it's him or someone else makes it happen. Someone's got to stand up to these people.
Yeah, it's true. Well, I wonder if we're going to get our answer this week. It's possible that we'll see, the way this will unfold. The big evidence drop or whatever it's going to be. The Q drop is going to come and we're going to know. So
well, we have a Q drop before Thanksgiving. That's my standard for whether we'll know before Thanksgiving.
Okay, yeah. So before Thanksgiving or bust, right?
Yeah, I think we will. I think we'll have a good sense by Thanksgiving.
Okay, and just a disclaimer, I don't think either of us, I speak for myself, do espouse the QAnon theory, just in case anyone listening wants to know. I did say
just on the record,
it was a joke. So that's that. We'll wrap it up here. If you're watching now, thank you for watching now. If you're listening later, thank you for listening later. We will be back next time for more garbage. Honestly, more stupid crap that we see in. And until then, just have a great time. See you later.
One of these days, we're going to have a philosophy podcast, and it is going to be off the chain.
That's right. Maybe we'll have a special where we just talk about important things.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Maybe.
All right. See you later.
See ya.